2NURFM.com, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.
Joining us from the University of Newcastle is the Head of School of Education, John Fischetti. Very fine morning to you, John.
Good morning, Meryl.
Isn't it interesting how we spend our life believing things and then something comes along and blows it out of the water and you think, oh, I always thought that was true. And that's the focus of our conversation today, John, isn't it? The myths around learning.
So much of the education, at least that I had, and I'm projecting a couple generations younger to you, Meryl, that is, we took the education that was delivered to us. And what if education was the one that was right for us? And to do so, we have to overcome some of the neuromyths, myths about how the brain works and how learning takes place that might mean everybody has incredible potential. It's the jobs of our parents, our society, and particularly teachers to unlock that potential.
Can you explain to me what you mean by neuromyths? What is that?
So many of our listeners, when they were in school, might have been taught that, well, that's your left brain thinking, and your left brain controls this sense of the directness and straightforwardness, and your right brain is creativity and all this other stuff about which is really not what the brain is. The brain is a holistic organization working in concert with centers of activity. So this left brain, right brain stuff, which might have been, well, that's why you're not creative, is actually not true.
Really?
And what we've learned is that everyone has those capacities, some to a greater or lesser extent, but everyone can develop that creative side, even if they didn't believe they could. It might have been bad teaching, or at a particular developmental phase in your life, you weren't exposed to those things which push the right buttons for you, because all the examples were about footy and that wasn't interesting to you.
That is really interesting, and that does blow a lot of things out of the water, because you often hear people say, men, a lot of men are left-brained and that's why they're practical and they can read maps, and a lot of women are very creative. Again, very stereotypical stuff and boxing people in.
A lot of that created by the stereotypes themselves. A similar one is about this notion of visual, auditory, and kinesthetic.
Yes, I've fallen victim to that.
Yeah, and in fact, everyone looks better. You currently have a pen in your hand. You're doing that to create at the end of the tips of your fingers, where there's literally thousands, if not millions of nerve endings, a stimulus to motivate your brain. So teachers who have lessons where if we're studying ancient Egypt and we have a coin in our hand, not just because the coin is interesting because it came from that long ago, but we actually have inside of that the kinesthetic connection. So we're all of those learners. It's not, well, he's an athlete, so he's a kinesthetic learner. He could never read a book. We're all of those simultaneously, and we all have to be good at all of those. So this sense of not segmenting the brain into these parts, both of those first two examples.
We're talking with John Fischetti today, Head of the School of Education at the University of Newcastle. We do this every other Wednesday, and if you've missed a few, you can catch it on podcast. Today we're busting some myths. While we're busting the big myths, you've still blown my mind about the whole left brain, right brain thing, because I've been known to, think about that. This idea, and it's an area that a lot of people are interested in at the moment, it's called neuroplasticity. And that concept that we've had in the past of you get so many brain cells and alcohol and fast living wipe them out and you'll never get them back, so you better look after yourself, and it's all kind of downhill after about 18 for your brain. Are you going to say that that's not true as well?
Well, the alcohol doesn't help, the drugs don't help, and the laziness doesn't help. But
sure.
We used to think after 17 or 18 it was downhill till you died. Now we know we continue to generate neural pathways our entire lives, that cells regenerate and can be expanded. It does help to be a fit person who's taking in the right protein and carbohydrates and mix for the brain. But we continue to learn and we continue to grow the brain our entire lives. So we can learn new skills. The trouble is we have to learn differently. Adults can't learn a new language unless they're immersed in it. So sitting in a classroom conjugating verbs to learn Spanish will not teach us Spanish. We have to go to a Spanish-speaking country in anticipation of that, want to know how to read the menu or go to the toilet or to find out where the train is. It's because the brain does lock in certain things because it narrows its focus. It gets very good at what it's good at and tries to forget the rest. It doesn't mean we can't learn it. We just can't learn it in the rote way. Maybe that's why people like history when they get older, because they actually go to places and start to discover it rather than take a test about it.
And is that as opposed to a small child who can be multilingual and learn it very easily because the brain is so open and
Yes.
exposed at that young age.
It hasn't refined itself to be very skilled.
Okay, that
We're
makes
very, very keen before age 11 and particularly before age 6 to all new ideas, and we become very fluid, very plastic in our brain before that. After that, we've got to get it experiential. That's why high school for some kids is almost a predetermined fate, because the way we typically teach is by setting people in rows and talking to them and having them regurgitate answers on tests, just at the point the brain is locked in its skill set. So if we really want students in high school age, they have to be up and about and doing stuff, engaged in their learning to motivate why they might want to sit and read a book about it as well. They have to get going, or the brain is interested. It's the same with multitasking. It's, we know you can't text and drive because you're likely, many, many times more likely to cause a crash. But we also can't do two things at the same time. I can't be watching television and talking to you. I need to actually turn it off because our brains are not sophisticated yet enough to really understand what's coming through that. Doesn't mean classical music in the background while studying can't enable. For some people it does. But the actual invasive white noise that comes from so much of what we do is a distraction. It's actually getting in the way of relationships because people assume I could be texting right now while talking to you, and I'm not doing either one well if I do.
Actually, I had that experience with a colleague this morning. She was showing me something and said, I've just got to do this. And I thought, that's a joke. You can't do that, Mel. Just listen to what she's saying to you.
You actually
and
can't.
then do the next thing next.
And we have to teach there's an off button. There's another one about we only use 10% of our brain. Were you taught that one? And so the rest is idling, and that's why you want to chew gum or doodle we're always using the whole brain. The question is how effectively and how motivated we are. We have to get people's attention, and we have to have repetition. And that repetition has to be in multiple ways for us to learn stuff. So this notion of there's 90% of your brain laying idle while you're watching a movie, so you might as well be doing 6 other things is actually not true. We use the whole brain the whole time. It's just some of us haven't gotten really polished in how we're using it, and we're not connecting it back to long-term memory, which comes from having a meaningful experience.
Wow. So if the little take-home snippet for today, John, is if you want to learn something, let's say at an older age, let's focus on folks that aren't at school anymore, or it's never too late to learn.
Absolutely.
But if you do want to learn something, you need to fully immerse yourself in it, really concentrate on it, and I'm holding the pen now, do something that connects that learning with your body and mind so that you have a full experience.
Exactly. And the assessment task for that is actually applying it, not just taking a test about it. There may be a skill we're trying to learn, like flying a plane. There's probably a test you need of how to put the flaps down. But you actually have to be in the simulator to understand that, and you have to crash that simulator several times. You're not going to just learn how to fly a plane by reading a book.
There you go. You've got to do it. And the old use it or lose it still sounds pretty true.
I think so.
John, thank you so much. It's the University of Newcastle's Head of School of Education, John Fischetti. He joins us every fortnight. And if you'd like to play this conversation back to someone and say, I told you so, then just go to the 2NURFM website and look for our podcast. I'll see you in a couple of weeks, John.
Thanks, Meryl.